So Webparts, their base configuration within a site collection is defined by an XML file that's in a specialized document library called the Webpart gallery. And the global site definition creates that library, and therefore it's available. Every single site at the same URL is going to have the Webpart gallery. It's just _catalogs/WP. You can check out a site's Webpart gallery via the site settings page. By conventions, Webparts that you're working on for current version of SharePoint, so SharePoint 2013, and even 2010, are going to have the file extension of .webpart. But there are Webparts from previous versions, 2003 and I believe 2007. Might be wrong in 2007, but those use the extension of DWP. That's just some backwards compatibility. The XML file is going to identify the class and assembly to load for the Webpart. So when you think about the XML file that's in the Webpart gallery, it's mostly just metadata, and then SharePoint uses that. So when you go to add a Webpart to a page, SharePoint's reading all that information from the XML file, and then it's using that to display the title, the Webpart, the description. And then when you actually go and add that Webpart to the page, it goes in and figures out the class and assembly that it needs to load up. Then it also looks at the properties that have been defined in that Webpart file, and then it sets, once it instantiates your Webpart class, it does that, and then after it reads the properties, it's going to dynamically set the properties on your Webpart. Again, the Webpart gallery is located at _catalogs/WP. So here's a typical example of a Webpart file. In this case, this is the search Webpart that is not out of the box. This is just something that we have built, or that you could have built. As you can see, it's the format's going to be the same every time, though. So it has the metadata section where it has the type name and then an import error message. So if there was an error when you were trying to add the Webpart to a page, that would show up. And then it has the data section with properties. There's more properties, but these are the properties that have been set. So by default, when you create a Webpart in Visual Studio, these are the properties that get set by the Visual Studio designer by default when you add a Webpart item. And then you can go in and modify these. So title, description, export mode, we're going to cover that in just a second, but that allows you to actually export whatever properties you set on the Webpart. And so in order to get the Webpart to the catalog, the way we do that, like we deploy any files inside SharePoint, is we're going to use the module element. And module element is actually part of the feature. The feature, you will use a feature to deploy a module. So in this case, we're going to deploy our Webpart file to the _catalogs/WP document library. And in this case, we make it Ghostbone Library. And it's important to give it a group name, because that's how it shows up when you go to add a Webpart. The UI in SharePoint categorizes all the Webparts according to the group. So it's good to put a meaningful name on that. So the easiest way to create a Webpart file is to create a Webpart on a page in SharePoint and then just export the Webpart. So the export process is actually going to give you that you're going to download the .webpart file. So you can just configure that in your browser and export the Webpart. And then once you get that, what you could do is actually update that Webpart file. And then if you wanted to, you could manually load that back in to the Webpart gallery if you wanted to. You could even go to, when you add a web part to a page, sometimes you have a choice of browsing for the web part, and you can actually browse to that web part file. So there are some ways to get, that's actually a little trick to use sometimes when you're in a version of SharePoint and you want to use the previous version's web part that's no longer in the web part gallery. Sometimes a little trick you can do is check to see if the web part still actually exists. Make sure that the class for it still exists in whatever assembly it was in. And if it does, and it's just not in the web part gallery, you can get the old web part file for it and then just upload it yourself, and it'll work in the new version of SharePoint. It's just backwards compatibility. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and take our list web part that we've been working with, and we're going to allow it to be exported, and then we'll create and deploy a new web part file based on the exported XML. Okay, I'm going to have the team site open. We have our list web part on the home page. So I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to go into Visual Studio, and I'm going to look at the web part. And I noticed that I don't have a property set to export. So I'm just going to go into just a constructor for the list web part. Actually, I don't have a constructor, so I'm going to create a constructor. And I'm going to set the export mode property to all and redeploy this. So this is going to allow me to do, let's go ahead and re-render that. That's going to allow me to export the web part from the browser. Okay, I'm going to go and edit the page. And now I'm going to export. And so it's asking me to save. So I'll save this to, let's save it to the desktop. And I'm going to rename that. Copy that into Visual Studio. Actually, I'll just open this with Notepad. Oh, that's okay. Let's see. Let me start Notepad up here. I'll just drag it into Notepad. Okay, so what's interesting here is that you see a lot of out-of-the-box properties here, but then here's the property that we added, the list property. And so this is coming out of the SharePoint content database. And so you can see here that when we export it, we got the current value of that list. And so if we go back to the page, let's just stop editing. It is currently set to birds. That's what we set it to last, so that is correct. So let's do this. Let's go and copy that. Actually, just copy all these properties. And then we'll change a few of them. So now I'm going to open up the web part file here. And we'll just overwrite these properties. And for the title, I'll just say My Amazing Lists Web Part. everything else the way it is. So now what I want to do is go back to my page. I'm going to get rid of the instance of the Webpart on here. We'll save that. Let me go back to Solution Explorer. We'll redeploy our Webpart. And we'll wait for that to come back up. Okay, go back and edit the page. We'll add that Webpart back. New and improved version of the Webpart. Custom. And notice how it's changed. The title changed. It's changed to what we told it to be inside the Webpart file. And remember that initially it was, when we first used it, it was always set to use fruits. But we set the property specifically to birds in that file, so it should show up with birds when we add it to the page. And it does. So what we saw in this demo is how to use the properties of the Webpart, how to export them, and then how to bring them back into the site.